to our second alumni panel of the summer about careers in school social work. We have 4 very accomplished alumni here today who are going to talk to us about their career journeys, what they do now, their advice for everybody. And we're going to start off by just asking everyone to introduce themselves, who you are, what you do, your interests, general.
Sure. My name is Rachel Duvall, and I work for the Torre Safe at Home Foundation, which is a nonprofit that does a program in the schools called Margaret's Place. So Margaret's Place, a counselor is placed within a school, and the focus of the program is working with kids exposed to domestic violence. So we have a room within the school that's a safe space for kids to come. They can come to the room and just hang out. The room is open. It's sort of like their space. Or they also can come in for counseling, group, individual. And then we also do anti-violence education for the whole school. And we do training on trauma and domestic violence with the staff as well. And then we also have a peer leadership program, which is the kids apply to be sort of the ambassadors of the anti-violence message throughout the school. So yeah, and I've only been there a few months, so I'm a little new at it. But before that, I worked in an outpatient mental health clinic. And I have an interest in creative arts therapy too. I have some background in that.
Sure, my name is Scott Bloom. I'm the Director of School Mental Health Services for the New York City Department of Education. It's actually a joint program with the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, with the Office of School Health, so anything health-related comes under our charge, so to speak. I provide, one of my main functions to provide technical assistance. We have over 400 schools that have enhanced mental health services. It could be from an on-site mental health clinic to schooling services with agencies in the community, screenings, treatment on-site, treatment off-site, mobile response teams, crisis teams. So I'm involved with a lot of that. You can imagine I sit on a lot of city and statewide committees to advocate for mental health services, emotional well-being for the 1.2 million kids in New York City. I'm also an adjunct professor here at NYU School of Social Work, and I have a private practice in supervision.
I'm Kelly Heller. I am the coordinator of special services at Marion P. Thomas Charter School, which is in Newark. We are an independent charter school of 768 kids, pre-K through 4. I've been there since the Monday after I graduated with my MSW in 2010. So I'm jumping right into it. Our population is 100% African American. 99.9% of our students qualify for free or reduced lunch. We do a lot of work with families. We have a lot of students who come from broken homes. We do a lot of work outside in the community trying to recruit students and make partnerships with agencies in Newark. We are in a difficult section of Newark, so we see a lot of violence. We do a lot of work around crisis and prevention and domestic violence as well. And in my spare time, I like to play football.
Flat or touch? My name is Lori Hiller. I was here as Lori Schain. I am a school social worker on a school-based support team in the New York City Department of Education. That means I have a main school, which is an elementary school in Brooklyn. When I started working there, they had 400 kids. Now they have 950. And another 1 or 2 days a week, depending on the year, I'm at another school, which is a middle school, also in Brooklyn. And I do a variety of individual and group work. I support staff. I do workshops for parents. Basically, I do whatever either my creativity or the principal or the work we do together asks me to do. And I worked for 10 years out after school with an outpatient mental health clinic, which gave me a lot of good crisis intervention and individual and clinical work. And then I do a lot more concrete work in the school system now. And actually, interestingly enough, I'm now working in two very upper middle class schools, which come with their own set, which is distinctly different than working with schools in more violent neighborhoods.
I would argue more difficult.
In some ways, it's been much more difficult.
So to start out at the beginning, what drew you to school social work? What influenced your decision to pursue that work?
I actually didn't start out looking for school social work. I wanted to work with teens, and I became really interested in the RAP programs, the relationship abuse prevention programs. There's a couple of different ones in the city, and he probably knows a lot more about those. But so I was reading about those types of programs and became really interested in that, and then learned about the Joe Torre Safe at Home Foundation. So it was more my interest in working with, relationship abuse prevention, domestic violence, and working with teens that led me to working in this program.
I fell into it. I was working at another agency, and for various reasons and dynamics, we decided to look for something different. And a friend of mine was working at a school-based health center, which is a health center is really a medical model where they take a medical clinic and they put that into a school. Many of them offer mental health services, not all of them do, and they're licensed by the State Office of Health. State Office of Health. You have about 215 schools in New York City that do that. And it sounded interesting, it sounded exciting. The idea that you could actually do treatment in a school and it was licensed and taken care of. And I started that. I've been in the field for over 22 years, but I've been doing school mental health or some connection to it almost ever since, for many years.
This is my second career. So I came to NYU to become a school social worker. When I finished my first career, I took a year trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up. And on Saturday, I was working for New York Cares, volunteering, cleaning up PS 189 in Crown Heights, and walked out there and said, this is what I want to do. And I applied to NYU, and that's what I came to do.
I actually always wanted to work with kids or teens. And my two field placements, at the time I begged for a school social work placement. If there were any, I never heard of them. But they placed me with the Youth Residence Center from JCCA, which no longer exists. They were all teens. And then my second one, that was my second one. My first one was in a community mental health center where there were a variety of ages. And through that, I stayed with JCCA, waiting and waiting and waiting to see if I could find school social work. It was very hard to get information. It was very hard to figure out how to change over. I then had to stop work because babysitters made more than social workers, and I had two children, and I couldn't afford it. But the goal I made with my husband at the time was if I could afford to pay for the child care that it took to work, I could work and pay for the child care. I could do that with one kid, I couldn't do that with two. So I was out of the field for 4 years. And I got back in, that was the story, and I thought I was going to be a happy stay-at-home mom. I wasn't. I was eager to get back to work. And I went to, there was a position opened up that year called a parent coordinator. And it is not a clinical or a social work position, but a bunch of us, when we first got in, there was a good handful of us who all had MSWs, who were all hoping to make it more clinical. We all found it fulfilling in some ways, and that we were completely overeducated for it in others. And I would say of the crew of us that I remember starting as MSWs, almost everybody is now out. But what happened is I befriended the assistant principal. We went out for drinks, we became social friends, and she became principal of her school, and her social worker was 85 and retired, and I took her spot. So when I tell people you have to know somebody and someone has to die or retire, it's sort of true. But the point I'm saying from that is more than you have to sort of be open to trying something else in order to get your foot in the door. And so I took that parent coordinator position. It was really nice for me because my kids were at the school at the time. And do a lot of things that are not, part of what you learn as a clinician or as a concrete-based social worker. But the things you learn and how you learn to be in a school milieu will hopefully take you where you want to go, sometimes better than other ways. Then again, a lot of other people I know have come in through school-based clinics. There's one in MS51 where I work, run by a local hospital, and other kinds of organizations that can get So,
So what are some of the challenges you faced early on in your career and how did you overcome them? Keep in mind that a lot of people are trying to get into this field. So what are they going to face? What
For
did you
me,
face?
I'm 12 years older than my principal. So for me, a lot of it was about finding someone that could relate to hiring someone that was older than they are. And I think I'm young, and I think I look young, but really I have a different kind of experience. I'm not a teacher, which I also think is hard when you go into a school because everyone's a pedagogue, and in my building, I'm one of 4 people that have never been a teacher. And I think that at NYU, you learn a lot of clinical skills and a lot of group skills, and you kind of go in with this ideal vision of a nice office where you're going to do counseling, but the truth is that I call my job triage. I never know what I'm going to do. I spend plenty of days running down the halls after someone or something. So I think that for me the biggest challenge was my age, which actually isn't a challenge at all, but I thought it would be. And kind of having this ideal vision of being a counselor with a nice office and doing counseling, and really my job is much more about making the day better for just somebody. And it's day to day, it's moment to moment, it's really fast, and I love it, but it wasn't at all what I expected.
I think maybe finding the clarity of what I wanted to do. My 2 field placements couldn't have been more different. I worked with homebound elderly my first year, and then I worked in a psychiatric hospital with eating disorders my second year. So when I left, I wasn't clear about what I wanted to do. So my first job, although I was very grateful for the experience, it wasn't right for me. So I had to kind of rethink things and really do a lot of evaluating about what I really, really wanted to do. So it took me a little while to hone in on that.
I think that my first job, I've only had, I've been in the field 22 years, I've had 2 jobs. So I consider myself very lucky. But my first job was very crisis oriented. It was outpatient mental health, and I worked with a lot of families. I was not well supervised. I did a lot of work with kids ages 3 to 18 and their parents and their foster parents and their grandparents, and got to know a lot of them clinically very well, but I could never figure out what they were doing during the day. And it was impossible to reach teachers, and I could never ever form the kind of relationships I wanted, but I did all this deep work. And then I started working in the schools where I'm working with up to 900 kids, but the work was a lot more concrete and a lot less clinical than I was used to. And so then I got to know everything about these kids minute by minute through the day, and my goal was to try to get them to go to outpatient mental health clinics to do the deeper work that I didn't have the time or resources to do, and the explanation that the kind of work I did, where kids came into my office and we formed deep bonds and we talked about all sorts of crisis-related, very deep things, and they had to feel safe and then leave. You can't do that in a school because you can tell a kid about confidentiality up the yin-yang. In a school, you can try to keep confidentiality, but kids see, other kids see you walk in, they see you walk out. If you want to bring a kid down to really work deeply, and then they have to get themselves back together and walk into a classroom. So the differences between the 2 jobs I had, it's almost like they fit together as one big mental health piece. But it's very hard to separate them out. And then the other piece, which is that the DOE itself does not expect me to do any of these things. According to the DOE, I write, I tell parents their rights when their kids get evaluated, and I write a family history, and that's pretty much it. So everything else I do on my time, and well, not my time, I do it on their time, but I have to explain to them that I'm coming from a social work set of mind, what that means, how I look at the milieu. They couldn't care. They don't supervise you, they don't really observe you, and they don't really care if you're doing clinical work as long as your paperwork is done. So the work I do with my individual schools and my individual principals, with what I think needs to get done and what they think needs to get done. And so, if you just go by your job description, I guess it could be cushy, but it's certainly not going to be the kind of work that I wanted to do when I wanted to work with kids. And that was about changing, how you see, is it going to be this lovely office where people come in and get a stuffed animal and sit on a beanbag chair?
I have one of those.
Right. But, so you have to sort of work with what you're given and how you're given it. I've lucked out. I have incredible principals and incredible schools that I work with, but not everybody's so lucky. The other social worker that comes into my building is completely emotionally abused by her principal on a regular basis, but can't, hasn't been able to get out. So, and hasn't been allowed to do half the things she wants to do. So a lot of it is luck, a lot of it is how you can work with the other people, and the other piece about it not being dependent on. When you first come in, the principals and administration are used to working with teachers. And you can have 5 master's degrees, but if you don't have a master's in education, then you don't know what it's like to be in a classroom. And so you have to be humble, and you have to be willing to open your mind, and willing to listen, and willing to be in a classroom. And honestly, I'm glad I'm a social worker. I would not want to be in a classroom all day.
Teaching is so hard.
Being a teacher is incredible. I've subbed for a period or 2 at a time. Those are the most tiring days I have. So,
I have to go into the classroom a little bit for our anti-violence education, and that has been an education for me. It's really, really hard. It's very hard.
It is.
But I enjoy doing it. It's a nice challenge, but I'm glad that I only have to do it 5 sessions per class. And then I
You
go.
make really, I don't get supervision, so I remember supervision was a big thing here. I don't get supervision.
Right.
My direct report is the principal. I've never had any kind of social work supervision. And I like it that way. I have complete autonomy, but I don't know that everyone would like it that way. And the majority of my job when I got there immediately almost became being an administrator. So I never wanted to be a pedagogue, and I did go back and get my administrator cert from Rutgers. I did, because I was doing so much administrative work that I didn't want to, be doing it and not A, be compensated, or B, be able to leave and become an administrator, because now I'm a social worker, but I also do all the IDEA grants, and all the things that I never learned about in NYU that I have on the fly, what a 504 is and everything else. So I did go back and get my administrator cert.
and there were days
Which I had no plan on doing, ever.
Our principal and assistant principal leave for a meeting, and the guidance counselor and I are left in charge of the
That's right,
building.
yes.
And neither of us have administrative certificates.
Well, that was the other problem, is that something would happen in the building and there was no one around. So they would come to me, and I would have to hunt somebody down. Even though I knew what to do, I couldn't sign off on the paperwork. So I did go back and get my understanding.
So I'm in an administrative position now, so I can talk about the challenges of that, because I'm working with a lot of your systems, as we call them, active systems. But I can relate a lot to what Lori's talking about, and a lot of my job is with people like Lori in mind. So I'll talk about when I first started out. I think working in schools can be very isolating. And I've taken that to every level that I've had when I've directed programs and school programs. I've always remembered the people who are in the, on the field, so to speak, or on the playing fields, to understand that it can be a very isolating place, working in schools. Also, I know, and I learned this early on, and when I hire, or when I have been able to hire, people to work in schools, you have to have a bit of that adolescent with you, and you have more if you're working with little kids, you have to have a little bit of that ability to digress and work with them. Because they're going to pick up right away how false or how true you are. A lot of the work is with the teachers. I do lots of presentations on I really see my job as bridging mental health with schools. So I go to a lot of national committee, meetings and conferences, and I'm on planning committees and so on, to really change it from a support service to an academic service, and have to shift that model, because that's the way the teachers are going to listen to you. So a lot of your work, if you work in a school, you'll be the solo person, maybe 1, maybe 2, and a lot of your job is going to be with the teachers more so than with the kids. Whenever things happen, how the teachers react, often more traumatic, more aggressive, more volatile than the kids. The kids is like, oh, okay, we can deal with that. We can deal with the families and so on. This is not a judgment, and I want to make it clear. This is not a judgment. This is because you have 2 different disciplines. So they have the language of the teachers, and we have the language of social work and mental health, emotional, social. And it's like going all of a sudden speaking Mandarin or Russian or a language you don't know. So how to learn that language is something that's a philosophy of mine, and something that I try to impart on others. Also, I think first starting out, I think group supervision is very helpful. As Laura was saying, if you have a supervisor, if you're working with a community-based organization that puts you into a school, whether it's an after-school program, there's about 140 agencies that do that. I work with 40 mental health agencies that have school mental health programs, and there's another 15 or so that do, well, 20 more that do school-based health centers. You'll get the supervision, because you're going to be doing DSM-4, 5, you're going to be doing best practices and so on and so forth. Because other folks, and Lori probably knows this as well, is that because the DOE staff don't get supervision and they are hungry for what you will have. So that's important to do. So you have to be prepared. As I say, there's real time and then there's school time. You have to understand this. When I work with the policy folks and the administrative folks, now my administrative hat, they don't get that. And I have to, they think the summer is great. I said, in June 28th is coming. If you don't have this out, the principals will not be there. They'll come in later in August. And sure enough, there was this thing that had to get done. Told you so. Because there's school time and there's real time. And you have to be, you can't be a wallflower. This is not the field for you. You can be, you have to be independent, you have to be flexible, kind of Teflon, not take it personally, because the teachers do, and the parents do, and the kids do. But you have to find a way to do that. And I think supervision is important.
I just want to speak to one thing that you just said. In charter schools, there is no real time and school time. I work August 19th until June 28th. I had last week off. I'm working this week. So this is June 8th until August 1st. So I will have 19 days off, including vacation, including weekends. So, and we also work 7:30 to 5:30. So it's definitely a different world in charter school now.
And hybrid differently too, right?
What do you mean?
Like, I think that when you work for a charter school, you go directly to the charter school to
Yes,
apply.
absolutely.
As opposed to the
That's right.
DOE
That's
where.
right.
And they may pay you better.
And they may pay better.
I hope so.
Charter schools?
Sometimes they have budgets sometimes.
You know, the budget is different in the charter schools, public school, and we don't talk about charter school funding. But because of the length of the year, each school, charter school is different. There are charter school companies. We're an independent charter school. It also depends, a lot of charter school work is grant work. So we may have grants going into our salary to cover, because you, especially in Newark, you're trying to attract people to come to Newark, first of all, and then to convince them that it's a great idea to work from 7:30 to 5:30, 205 school days plus summer. So you have to sometimes have an incentive with that.
I think also what Scott mentioned about supervision. You know, my first job at the outpatient mental health center, you were required to have supervision, and it wasn't necessarily very good all the time. And so I hired a private supervisor through the Gestalt Center where I was getting some postmaster's work done. And that was really, really helpful. And I was doing some very deep work with some very, very critical kids. I'm not doing as much clinical work, but there is zero supervision, zero. Any kind of, my quote-unquote supervisor is checking on paperwork. They are not checking on any work you're doing. They don't know your kids' names. They don't know what the problems are. They don't, I mean, it's not that they don't care, but they don't have time. They're dealing with administrative issues only. And so if you want supervision, and the other thing is that even when I work with the school guidance counselor, we're very close, she's coming from a slightly different discipline. And if I'm talking with the assistant principal and the principal, they're both pedagogues. And so there's a lot of times that I have to educate them first before we talk about them. And so for a huge thing going on right now, for example, there's something called a special ed reform. And when a child comes into your school now, you no longer can say, we can't help this child well, they need to go to a separate school that has a different process. You have to keep each of the children and work with them as best you can. But there's no professional development to help you work the best you can. So you go off and do your own research. So for example, the autistic spectrum is huge, and it's coming full force to us, and we don't have all the education to deal with it.
There are some specialized
There are some specialized schools, but they can pick and choose who they want. So we have some ASD kids. We have a beautiful Nest school, 2 blocks from our building, that has rejected 3 of our kids and accepted 2 of our kids. So the other 3 they rejected are still with us. And so you don't always know exactly what you're doing with the student, but there are times where I have to educate the administration So for example, one little boy, whenever he got frustrated, would say, I hate you, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to blow up this building with a bomb. If a kid normally says that, that's suspendable. If an ASD kid says that, and we know he only says it because when he's frustrated, those are the words he had, I had to educate the principal as to how we can't suspend this child, and that every time my thought with him was, now that means you're upset, so instead you can't say I hate and kill and bomb, we're going to say I'm angry right now. I mean, it sounds very simplistic at times, but you had to educate the administration first to know that when he said he hated, killed, wanted to stab, and he had like some very violent language, for some reason that took, and the feelings language took a little while longer, but you know, those things are not suspendable. So there were times where I was spending educating the administration on what we see from these children and why, so that they can then work with the teacher that's working with this child to understand it more. And with no professional development or very little, and not a lot of clinical, you're talking, the thing that you just said to me was the two languages. You're dealing with the language of education, and remember, you're dealing with the language of education of some staff who are just out of school with new masters and a lot of new information, and teachers that have been working for 30 years and are already overwhelmed with the use of computers and the use of IEPs and don't have much room or tolerance left for new information from you. So, you know.
I think you make a good point, though. I didn't know anything about special education when I left here, and my entire job is based upon special education. So in New Jersey, we already have that law. So if someone's in my building and they are autistic and they arrive that way, it was my job to educate them. So I knew nothing about any of this when I got there. I didn't know what the different classifications were, and you learn on the fly. But it is part of my job now. And so you talk about suspensions. We don't talk about discipline here, because in my ideal vision was the social worker can't do discipline, because how can I expect you to come to my office and explain to me your feelings and then discipline you for them?
Right, and then
suspend you for them. So it's a very fine line that you find yourself working, because you are in the role of doing both of those things, and really being in my role, the special education expert, and I've never walked into Steinhardt. So for me, it was learning on the moment. I'm the only person there. I don't have a guidance counselor, I don't have a school psychologist, I don't have an LDTC on site. Learning disabilities. But I can recite an IEP and write one with my eyes closed now, but I never even touched one when I was here.
Maybe one of the advantages of having outside agencies
I was
like
just going to say, I have a lot
yours,
of advantages.
Yes.
working for a school-based mental health clinic or a school-based health center, is that you have the agency behind you. So you have the supervision, you have the discipline protocols. For someone like myself, would sit down with the principal and your agency representative and tell the principal what the agency can do and what they can't do. You keep going back to that. It's like sometimes, it's like with the kids, you put the chart on the magnets on the refrigerator, tell them you did your chores. They say, no, they can't do that. They can't substitute. They can't be hall monitors. They can't do a lot of crisis intervention. So it's very clear, so the principal knows what he or she is getting. That being said, it still takes about 3 to 6 months to, at least for them as well as the school, to really get how these outside programs work and start to see the advantages of having programs and supports in a city right now where the capacity is very small. Kids going to outpatient clinics, if you end up working one of those, it could be 6 weeks for an intake and another 6 weeks just to get assigned. By having agencies like yours, or again, more of these mental health clinics on site, that the kids get seen right away.
Yeah, I think I've benefited from who's come before me in my program, because the role is very defined. I don't have anything to do with IEPs. I don't have anything to do with discipline. My room is very much, it is Margaret's place. It is not used for anything else. I have really good supervision, very grateful for that. I have a clinical supervisor and a program supervisor, and then we have weekly group supervision with the other counselors who are placed in Queens and Brooklyn. So I can't imagine not having the supervision. My first year when I was out of school, I was working at an outpatient mental health clinic, and there I had supervision, but there's so much administrative work and paperwork that has to be done that I didn't really have much time for clinical. There wasn't much time for clinical because we spent so much time talking about other things. So I actually was a part of a outside supervision group that was invaluable to me. I can't imagine getting through my the profession without that group. I was invited to be a part of it from a professor here, art therapist, Trina Fagan. So that's something I would recommend. And I know that individual supervision, paying for it yourself, and it's not counting towards your clinical hours, so it's an expense. But if you can find a group, it's more affordable, and I found that it kind of functioned as like a support group too.
It's so emotionally supportive.
It was so important to me, and I tell everyone I know, if you can, or create your own kind of case consultation group or something, I just think it's really helpful.
I'm not sure that I could do the work I'm doing now in the school if I hadn't had the supervision and the experience I've had in the outpatient mental health center first. You know, because I started in the schools as an experienced, more confident therapist than I did, you know, initially. And that's made a lot of difference because, you know, and there are times discipline-wise, the guidance counselor will say to me, I've been treating this kid, he needs to get suspended, you need to do it with him because it's going to ruin our clinical work. And we try to do it there for each other, but she doesn't get supervised either. So we try to sort of peer support each other.
Yeah.
But the other part is the opposite of what you were talking about flexibility. When you're in the DOE and you're not from a separate agency, you need to be as flexible as possible while still maintaining some boundaries. So, you know, if something needs to be swept and the custodians are busy, you pick up a broom and
You do recess duty.
Right, you do. If the aides didn't come in and you know there's not enough adults out in recess, you do recess. Now but there is a limit. So, you know, I had one principal who, thank God I'm out of that school, but she would permanently put you in spots you weren't supposed to be in. She wouldn't come in and say, I'm really, really sorry, but all the aides are absent today. Could you do one period of lunch? That's respectful. She was, no, you have to go in and do this and this and this. And then I'd say, but that's not part of our thing. She said, well, I'm saying it is. This is how we function. We're a team. We're a team meant that whenever she wanted you to do something, then you had to do it. So you have to be very careful. You need to be as flexible as possible. You really don't want to say, you know, no all the time. At the same time, if you can't get your work done. So there are times while I'm asked to cover a class, never more than a period of time. And I'll say, and if they ask me and I have something important, I'll say, no, I have a parent meeting, I can't do that. They'll find someone else. So we've sort of made ourselves a sort of flexible thing where I'm there to help you whenever I can, but if I can't, they've got to find somebody else. And so that's why my school placement works really nicely. There are not a lot of social workers as lucky as I am in that particular realm. But it's true, it's not defined, it's not separate.
Thank you.
So it's very hard at times to do that.
See, I like that way, but I don't know if everyone will. You know, I will volunteer for recess because my feeling is I can see everyone in an unstructured environment doing all the things that they like to do when they can, in theory, do whatever they want. And I think for me, it's invaluable, and I can see 100 fourth graders at lunch. I'm not a big fan of lunch duty, but I do it every day. You know, especially in a charter school, we wear a million hats. We're completely understaffed. I sometimes, you know, do breakfast duty, and I'm finding myself sometimes in my brain saying 7 years of college to clear trays. But sometimes that's what I do. And I think that part of being a social worker in a school is that you do have this defined role, but you don't really do that. So you have to really be willing to do everything, because not being a pedagogue, at least from my perspective, and not being an administrator at some point, you're kind of lost out there. No one really knows what you do. And if you feel that you're too good for something, it's just not going to work. You have to be willing to go on a school trip that gets back at 4:30, even though you want to get back at 2. And you have to be willing to do lunch duty. And you have to be willing to have a parent scream bloody murder at you in the parking lot before you've even gotten your coffee in your body. It's just how it goes. And you have to come from a place of you're doing good work. And that's why you're there every day. And for me, with lack of supervision, I like autonomy, but I think it's because, again, I went there as an adult, and I'm in an elementary school, so I'm probably the oldest person with the exception of the CEO, because I don't have a superintendent. And so for me, I don't feel I need supervision. I feel I just need support, and I get it.
I'm going to pause for a second and see if anyone has any questions that they want to ask.
I have a quick question. Do you know if there's a hiring freeze?
It depends, if you're talking about the DOE, from the DOE, basically, this is what I tell people, if they want to work for the DOE, there's I know a few steps, and maybe Lori can also talk about that. If you want to work for an agency, it's a different route. If you want to work for the DOE, you go to the website. The DOE website actually is an excellent website, and I have to say, I think it's very good. And you go into the HR and you start looking at the positions. That's one way of applying. You have to join the union, the UFT. Or you...
Advance?
No. But I mean, you have to understand that you are becoming part of the union. The other thing that I do, that I know many people have gotten jobs that way, is just go door to door. And you say, here's an area, and principal, if they need it. It's not necessarily a hiring freeze, it's that budgets get cut every year, and I'm not sure what's coming down the pipe this year in terms of how much a principal gets a budget. And if your budget, you have cut 2%, you have to find a way to do it. Often, I know schools where there are no guidance counselors because they've been cut. So that's another way of doing it.
So my understanding is that you need a specific guidance certificate.
Well, then that's guidance counselor.
That's
This is
the license.
social work.
You're the social worker.
Right.
There are two different.
No, I know.
Okay.
So you do need a guidance certificate. And then you have to be a school social worker and get a certificate.
No. You don't need a guidance certificate.
I'll say it's
No. If you have your MSW, your CSW, and you want to go through the school-based support team and become a school social worker through that, and I don't know about a hiring freeze. Right now, there's a teacher hiring freeze, but they can lift that, and you have to be around for it because they lift it and put it down and lift it and put it down all the time. But it's strange. To be on a school-based support team, you can get hired through the main regional offices, but usually you get interviewed by the specific principals who need them. So it's sort of a dual process. Some of the best ways, like the way I did, is you already know someone at the school and they know your work and they know who you are. And so when they need, when they hear that their 85-year-old social worker is retiring, they already have an eye on the fact that they know you. But that's not the only way to do it. Now, sometimes teachers have a budget, principals have a budget where they know they can hire, like I know one of the other parent coordinators who was an MSW didn't get an SBST job like I did. She went in part-time just as a social worker. So she doesn't have to do my paperwork. She just does counseling, just through this principal who pays her 2 days a week. So that principal cut up her budget pie and pays, Alice through that pie. But that's slightly different. So there are different ways to do it. But the most logical is to come in. You can ask to be known. You can, I wouldn't say the best way, but you can get a sub-license and then start subbing in a school so that they get to know you and then say, by the way, I'm actually a principal, a social worker. But that means you actually have to sub.
You have to still get, I know in New Jersey, you have to get certified as a school social worker, which is basically a paperwork submitting your transcript and everything else.
Right.
Is that correct, still in DOE?
Not for New York.
No.
Each state is different, so they can
So there's no, you
charge
have to
different
be.
money.
Right, exactly.
So you can get your provisional license
Right.
whenever you get your job.
Right.
But then your provisional license expires, and then you have to send the state money and some stuff to get your permanent license. And like, for example, I was working 3 years, got tenure, and then got a letter from the state that says, oh, by the way, you're going to lose your job because you don't have a permanent license. And I was like, but I have tenure. And they're like, yeah, but you still need to send us this. So I sent them all the stuff, and I got a letter back that says, we don't have any reports that you graduated from social work school. You're not a certified social worker. And I said, gee, that's funny. I pay you guys every year for my CSW.
Right.
Why don't you go across the hall to the dudes that give you the CSW? They're like, oh, we can't do that. So it took me and the union and a couple other people to get Albany to say, oh, right, you graduated 20 years ago. That's awesome. We did certify you 20 years ago. That's really nice. And then I got my permanent certificate. So, that's just, it's annoyance. It's not impossible. I never actually came close to losing my job. But, the states have different things. If I moved to New Jersey, I'd have to redo something, I'm sure.
Paper.
Yeah.
You have to do it every few years, though. Do you have to do it?
No, not in the DOE.
Not
DOE, I'm done, but my CSW, I have to pay every, right.
Every 2 years in New York, I have to pay, right?
Right.
2 years.
Yeah,
That's a
they
big-
keep changing it. They pay every 2 or 3 years, so they give you, right. You give them a couple $100, they give you a little piece of paper.
In New Jersey, right. I have to do it at my school every 2 years.
And you have to do continuing education credits.
So that's easy, because, I mean,
Yeah.
at least for me, I mean,
New
in a
York
charter,
is not.
at least in a charter school, I have, like this year, I had over 200 hours of professional development, which all count towards my continuing education. So I've got more continuing education than I'll ever need.
And New York does not require any continuing education credits, and it's funny because when I'm interested in looking at things, they'll say, oh, you can get a couple of credits for that. I'm like, need anything.
I've just been holding on to my certificates.
No, you do. I mean, my problem is I'd like some more professional development, but I don't want to be taken out of my school for anything that's not useful to me. So I'm glad that I don't have to get professional education credits because I don't want to have to go to these workshops that I'm not interested in. But on the other hand, I would love the school to be able to pay for me to go to, Asperger's, focused work, or working with disabled kids, or what happens, how to work with the pedagogical and the social work together. Like, there's things I'd love to be able to create for my own professional development, but I'm not required to do any.
In charter school, you have to have a professional development plan, and in it, you have to write your goals for professional development. So whatever they are outside of the school. So I, this year, probably did 25 hours outside of school. So in special education law, autism spectrum disorders, things of the sort. And that's part of your charter. It's written into the charter, and you have to do it. The school pays for it.
Oh, by the
That's
way,
what they think.
speaking another language is awesome.
Yes.
Because I have to tell you, being a white, Jewish, monolingual social worker has not put me in good stead. I have lucked out in getting a job. Because, white, I am the face of every social worker from 1970 to 1990, and it does not help. So like when I was going to leave, before I got the job at the DOE, there was a job at Mount Sinai I loved, and two of us were up for it. And then the guy said to me, I'm really sorry, you were perfect for the job, but there was a community member that was more perfect. That meant I didn't speak Spanish. So my school now is dual language. We have a French-English program. There are 2 dual languages on every single grade. I don't speak any French. I spend September saying, Felix, can you tell Jacques to give you the ball back in French? So there are things that would definitely be helpful. Speaking another language is definitively one of them.
Also, don't be discouraged.
Yeah, don't be discouraged. I'm here, I'm happy.
It is possible.
Yeah, there's over 130 different languages spoken in the school. So if you know more than one, your value has gone up, and you can ask for more too, particularly with outside agencies. I can tell you that. And that's something that schools of social work should really think about, and I'm not sure why they don't. In terms of scholarships, and 2 years, we'll give you 2 years of get your master's and 2 or 3 years of give back, because there are schools, particularly for Mandarin, Cantonese, Creole, that are hungry for good counselors, good social workers. And I'm not quite sure why the city, because there's about 6 or 7 schools that teach social work.
We have a huge African
I was going to
population.
say,
And we have a lot of kids that speak Robo. And the only person in our building that does is the school business administrator. And it's very uncomfortable to be in a child study team meeting and have to call the BA in to translate.
Where does Robo?
Most of our students are from Ghana.
So Kelly, I have a question for you. Is there a mission statement for your charter school?
Yes, would you like me to tell it to you?
I'm sorry?
Would you like me to tell it to you? Because we do it every
Yeah.
morning.
Oh, okay.
Part of the charter is all most charter schools is a very big morning meeting. So ours is, there's 150 kids. I have 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade, and we do the Pledge of Allegiance, which, it's unbelievable how fast that comes back to you. Then we do the student creed, discipline, focus, and on time. It goes from there. Then we do the girl power affirmation. Then we do the boy power affirmation. Then we do the mission statement.
When are these meetings?
Well, we can get through in about 10 minutes. And then after that, anyone that has a village announcement or someone that has to apologize to their class gets up and does their thing. And then myself or the principal or anyone, says some sort of have a great day in the learning zone and sends them on the way. But Mission to Mary Peace and Homage to our schools, if you really want me to go into it, but yes, we do. And it's on everything that we do. But the overall arching mission for us is that it's a village, and it's very much a village. We try to be a village school. Kind of like Catholic Charities or Children's Aid, and we try and bring a lot on site. It is very difficult in Newark. You know, we look to Harlem Children's Zone a lot and kind of long for that, but it's just not who we are at this point.
I've worked in Newark for 5 years.
Yeah, so we,
Newark,
yeah, we just-
Irvington, East Orange.
Yes,
that whole area.
I am right on the Irvington border.
Right. Do you have a parents association?
We have a parent liaison. We used to have a PTA, a PTO, I guess, which is being disbanded. But we do have a parent liaison, and we have a woman that is the head of the PTO, but there's no like monthly meeting like when I was a kid, like my mother was on a PTA, there's nothing like that.
Is it because the parents can't?
There's lack of involvement.
I have 2 questions. So the first one you guys kind of addressed, but I just want to clarify. For the DOE, you don't need a school social worker certificate?
I didn't know there was one.
Yeah,
When I was,
It looked like on the website that there was a...
There is one, and I'm under the impression that you do need it now. You can get your provisional when you graduate, and then you can get your permanent 3 years later. To work literally in the DOE.
You should check New York State's school regions and find out.
yeah, there's a
You really
nice,
find out.
NYSED.
It's
Look that up on Google.
Okay.
There's
Yeah.
a state website, and it will tell you what you need to know. NYSED. And when I was first out of grad school, there was such a thing as a school social worker certificate. And I remember when I was home with my kids going, oh, I wonder if I could just go take that now while they're little and then I'll have it when they're done. And when I went to research it, everyone was like, no, there's no such thing anymore. So,
There are associations,
I believe
there's
there is.
international associations.
yeah, they can pay money to an association, but
But I believe in New York there is, because we have a teacher in our building that just got certified, just got her MSW at Seton Hall, and she wants to work in New York, and she had to do it in order to get a job up in Harlem. I believe so.
I know there's some sort of process, but my last job, there was a woman who moved from the outpatient clinic to DOE, and I know she went through some sort of process before she got the job. I don't know what it was, but I'm sure it tells you how.
You can go to Court Street and take care of it.
I did some research for the Department of Education because I've 22 years working for the New York City Police Department. I don't want to leave, but I wouldn't want to leave it for another city agency where I could transfer my time.
Sure.
To your question, when I was doing the research, they did say, and I started the whole process already, it's called a provisional certification
Yeah.
and
Yes.
approval personnel services. And there are, quite a few steps. I've almost finished.
yeah, but aren't the steps just, from what I understand, the steps were fingerprinting at 65 Court Street and 2 courses about child abuse that you take online,
Right.
and that's it.
And
It's not
your
a test.
SW, no, there's no test, and your
Right.
SW,
You
and,
have to have your transcripts forwarded.
yeah, you have
It's
to,
like about
it's on
5
paper.
It's not-
It's all paper,
None of
it's
it's-
paper, and if you go to Court Street,
Right.
you can take care of it all there in walking.
You go to
walk in.
65 Court
You
Street,
just take care of it all.
it's a lovely downtown area, I lived near there
Yeah.
for 20 years.
You can walk
You
in.
go right into 65 Court Street.
You can do it all right there.
The 2, 3, 4, 5 to Borough Hall. And you just go inside and you ask and somebody will, happily tell you, you need this money and this and this and this and this. And it's paperwork and time. But there's no, when I was young, when I graduated here, there was an actual written test that you had to take that doesn't exist anymore. This is all online, money and paper. And you get the provisional certificate. And then after 3 years working full-time in a school, you then do more paperwork and money to get it changed to a permanent certificate.
Okay, thank you. My other question is, you all had kind of mentioned a couple things that address this, but I just graduated this spring, and like you had mentioned before, I definitely want to work with kids, definitely want to do counseling, mental health. So I've been looking at schools and at outpatient clinics and agencies. So my question is, from your experience, what do you think are the benefits of working at a school compared to an agency working with kids? You had mentioned lack of supervision, which is something to consider. Are there any other?
From my perspective, school is where kids go. So, kids go from school from 8 to 4, let's say. So everything else is just kind of, after school. And when I think about my childhood, it was either at school or at home, or at my friend's house. And to me, if I really want to be enmeshed in a child's life, I would go to school.
I think also working in an outpatient clinic, I worked in a children's outpatient clinic. I felt like really I more worked with parents. I did a lot of work with families and parents, and I was doing individual therapy with kids as well, but it was much more about communicating with the parents. Now in the school, I've had to make a shift because I don't communicate with the parents at all, unless the kids give me permission to. So it's a big shift for me. And I'm not really sure that one is better than the other, but I do really like being able to be where the kids are. Because one thing that was frustrating about being in the clinic is that you have to really work hard to get them there. And it's such a struggle. And whereas with school, they're there every day. You know, you can go get them out of class and they're so much more accessible. So that I really do like about it.
And if you were to get a job at a school-based satellite clinic, you have the both best worlds.
Yeah.
You have an agency that's going to give you the protocols, procedures. You're going to learn a lot in terms of, you know, maybe bypassing an outpatient agency, but you have the breadth of that agency behind you. But you are in a school. And so you do start chasing down some of the parents, but you do have staff that can help you do that. The best collaborations really work in tandem, where the school understands, as a school-based mental health clinic, what your role is and how they can help you and how you can help them. The turnaround time is easier, no waiting lists, and you get to see the kids. I would say about 5 or 6 kids a day you can see up to. The disadvantage may be that you're not out by 3, you're there till 4 or 5, or maybe, you know, different hours. You do have to, you're an agency, so you work in summer hours, you know, you'll get your 20 vacation days. But a lot of that time during the summer, particularly if the school is open, you can still see the kids there. You can do some groups, and you see the kids in vivo, you get to see them in their environment. And you also can do a lot of work, again, depending on the school, with the teachers and with the parents, the parent coordinators, and so on. So you have that support, so it's a little bit of the best of the both worlds.
And I would add that my work at the clinic was incredibly intense, and I used many more. When I went here, and I don't know if it's different now, but there was a huge emphasis on clinical work, and I did much more clinically based and theory-based and deeper work in the clinic. Even though I did work with a lot of families, when I walked out of that clinic, I had worked with children from the ages of 3 to 18, parents who were as young as 16, grandparents, foster parents, foster care agencies, ACS. So when I went into my next field and I went into the DOE, I brought with me incredible breadth of experience that in some ways made the school look so simple. But on the other hand, there are children in these schools who really need much more deeper work with them and their families. And in some ways, I describe it as Winnicottian. It's very much of a holding environment. Here's Miss Laurie's office. Miss Laurie is the feelings lady. You come in here and you can play and we can talk about feelings. But a lot of the kids are not going to come in a half an hour and chat about what's really bothering them, which they did in my clinical office, and then get themselves back together and go back up to class. So on some hands, I see them more, and I know more about their behavior and how they deal with lunch hour and how they're really speaking to the teacher and that. But on the other hand, they don't have the same clinical breadth that I did when I was at the agency. So you really can use, you know, there's not a bad decision to be made. I look back at my career and I'm not unhappy about it. I do find it emotionally easier in the school than I did in the clinic. And considering that I worked in the clinic before I was a parent and then went home to my family, in some ways I'm happy about how I did that. On the other hand, I work with kids all day and then I come home to my own kids, so they don't always win in that department. But I think that you know, I worked with kids my entire career. How I worked with them and where I worked with them, you know, that's changed around.
I also think really pay attention when you're interviewing for a job about caseload, because my caseload in the outpatient clinic was way more than what I'm doing now, and I quickly realized what that really meant. When I was
I think in school, though, it's impossible to say caseload.
Well, yeah, I know that's true, and it depends on the size of the school. It depends on you know.
Right, who else is
But,
there to help? Right.
I don't know. From my limited experience, I think outpatient clinic caseloads tend to be a lot.
Oh, they're enormous. I had 40 families in a 40-hour week that didn't include my case meetings and the fact that each family I sometimes met individual family and group work.
I
So,
had 60 to 70.
yes. But it was incredible. Look, I survived
Yes,
it, and it was an incredible
a lot of
experience.
incredible experience.
I got my
Yeah.
first upper GI series during it, but, you know, the dude's like, you're 25 and you're getting an ulcer check. What the happened? But, you know, you learn.
I was just recently offered a full-time position at a charter school, and I'm going to be meeting today with the administrators to go over the contract. I'm curious if you or any of you have any recommendations on things to watch out for or ask for.
I'm assuming, I don't know if there's a union at the charter school or not, but really the contract is with, we're unionized. Actually, I'm not sure if I agree with that, but, you know, yes, in theory. You're not going to have much leeway. The contract is what the contract is. Everyone gets the same contract, so basically you're going to sign it or not.
Right.
The only thing you can negotiate, I assume, would be your salary, but I don't know if there's a salary guide, because if there's a salary guide, your salary is what your salary is.
Right.
So there's really not much to negotiate.
Do you know if getting them to cover outside supervision to account for hours is...
Highly doubt.
Okay.
Unless there's some sort of big
But you should
money tree.
ask,
You should ask. Unless there's
because-
some big money tree they can shake.
Because they need to know where your head is at.
Right.
And if you're saying to them, I want outside supervision, well, we're not going to pay for that. Or we'll pay for part of that. Or we'll pay for some professional development.
Right.
You're telling them you're serious about this job.
I also think you want like professional development. But I mean, if it's an individual charter school, unlikely. But if it's something like a KIP or something like that, if
It's part of uncommon school.
you'll get plenty of supervision.
Yeah.
You'll have supervision there.
They don't...
No, but it's very intense. Uncommon is very
Are you
intense.
speaking of clinical supervision?
Yeah.
Or are you speaking of just supervision?
No, clinical supervision.
Uncommon's very intense.
Yeah.
But I think you're asking for licensure purposes. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
So that would be something.
You know, one of the things I find in schools, especially in charter schools, they don't even care so much if you have a social work license, so they're not going to, the C
Yeah, I was
meeting.
surprised about
Yeah.
how little they knew
Yeah,
about...
and the C is
the licensing
meaningless to them, even though it's meaningful to you.
Mhm.
And I imagine if you ask them that, they're going to ask you why, so you should probably have an answer prepared as to why the C is meaningful to you
Mhm.
in a school-based setting,
Right. Okay.
because to them it's not.
Right.
And like my program just got a waiver a couple months ago, actually. So up until then, the people that worked in the agency, they had their job there, but they also had part-time jobs in clinics to get their C hours.
Right.
So
The Commons are a really special place, so take the job.
Okay, thanks.
They're working really, really hard, though.
Yeah.
We have about 5 more minutes. We're going to take one more question. Or building up some closing thoughts and advice. And congratulations.
I'll tell you how I got my job. I knew I wanted to work in Newark, and it was doing super graduation, and I wrote what I thought was a great cover letter, and I got in my car, and I drove to charter school in Newark and dropped it off, and that was Tuesday. The only reason I remember is because I didn't have class on Tuesday. And by Wednesday I had 4 interviews, and by Friday I had a job.
I have a unique story that actually involves him. He didn't remember, but I was living in Washington Heights at the time, and my roommate was on the Washington Heights parents listserv, and I was looking for ways to make money as I was looking for a full-time job. And she said, "Well, why don't we put something on the parents listserv saying that you're available for nannying or pet sitting or whatever, and we'll add on the bottom that you just got your MSW and you're looking for a job." So she put this up, and I got several responses, one of them being his wife. And we met, and he, I believe, as far as I know, passed my resume on to then became my boss. I got an interview.
I've
So
done that quite a lot.
I think
Good Lord.
my advice is just like think outside the box. And
Yeah.
I actually I was seeing a job coach at the time. She's a professor over at Yeshiva in Fordham, but she made that suggestion, and I never would have thought to go that route to find a job, but you just never know what's going to lead to something. At my job now, I actually, our therapy supervisor, she has a private practice in Brooklyn, a creative arts therapy practice, and my supervisor, who I work with now, works in her practice too. So the connection's all over the place. You never know what's going to get your foot in the door. So just talk to everybody.
Right.
And make sure there's no misspellings on your, make sure there are no misspellings on your resume, give it to someone else to read.
Yeah, give it to
Because
someone
I mean,
else.
we go through so many of them, and it's like, especially for teachers, you know, you want to be a teacher, but you didn't double check your resume or cover letter.
Yes, principals said that more than once.
Yes, all the time.
And Scott, I don't
Scott, I
remember
have
your class.
You sound like you have 3 jobs. How do you handle it?
Good.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
Three jobs.
How do you appear to be so calm?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because most people, when they see me angry, it's very rare. It's very rare. And I tell you a story. One of my first jobs out of school, I remember it was a Monday coming back to the school, so this is 100 years ago. And I thought, gee, this is the first weekend I didn't think of my job. And I learned about something, says, how to lead, you lead the office, and how do you do that? So I've been working at that for years and years, and working at how to do that. And to kind of filter through the feelings. Because one of the things you're going to find working in school, regardless of what the position is more drama than crisis. So you have to be.
I gotta write that down.
So true. Oh my God, that's
It's
one of the
another
best.
whole presentation I do about
Yes.
the difference between drama and crisis, and most of it is drama, and you have to recognize it for what it is. And we know that drama can be a contagion, so you have to inoculate yourself and find ways of doing that. So that's what I do. It's like when I leave that, I put on my professor hat, and I've been teaching here for many, many years. I do HB 1 and 2. They're looking to change that a little bit too, so we'll see if it's how clinical that's good. We'll see. And then with patients or doing private supervision, just focusing on that person. So, but I think you have to do a lot of work, and you have to do a lot of work on county transference working in the schools, and that's why when you don't have supervision your own, that's I think you need it, especially when you're just starting out. You can work at the worst agency and it looks like this and disheveled and so on, but you have a great supervisor, that's worth your weight in gold. If you go to a place that's really pretty and looks nice, and your supervisor's doing it, you have to advocate for yourselves. And I tell my students all the time, you have to.
You make a really good point though about drama. Like I rarely take home my work in my head, and if I do, it's never about students. It's always about adults. And if it's about adults, it's not about parents. It's always about coworkers. So it's about a teacher or some sort of drama that's going on, like in the background. That especially at the end of the year when we're doing hirings and contract renewals and stuff. That's what is in my head on the weekends. Not rarely about a student. It's the easy part.
Well, and I can tell you, people say, oh, isn't it nice you have the summers off? And my answer to people is, unless you've worked in a school, you don't understand that everybody needs a mental break in order to come back in September fresh enough to teach your children. I said, but what I thought was interesting is when I first started, I needed the break from the kids. Now I need the break from the parents. Now, you have to understand, I work in an upper middle income school. So you're not going to necessarily hear that from all people that work in schools. But the drama that goes on with the upper middle class parents in the public school system is more exhausting than any of the crises that we've dealt with the children.
It's the mommy mafia.
So, mommy and dad.